What do cybersecurity and NASCAR have in common? I'm Tonya Hall for ZDNet and Tech Republic, and joining me is Dr. Ron Ross. He is a fellow at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Welcome, Ron.
Good to be with you, Tonya.
So tell us about NIST. What is your role in cybersecurity and what do you do there?
Well, NIST is a wonderful place to work. It has about 3,000 scientists and engineers. We have multiple laboratories for physics and chemistry, and I'm in the information technology laboratory. Within that laboratory, we have the computer security division, and that's where my home has been for the last 20 years. Our mission is to develop security standards and guidelines for the federal government and anybody in the private sector who wants to use our standards and guidelines on a voluntary basis. So we have a lot of work all the time. We are constantly trying to update our publications to make sure we stay on the cutting edge. And the bottom line is to try to help the American people have more secure systems and keep our businesses and our federal government as safe and secure as it can be in a world of really dangerous high-end threats today.
What are the largest security threats today?
I think the biggest threats today, when our adversaries attack our systems, and this problem goes really across the federal and state, local, private sector lines because we're all using the same computing technology. And the adversaries, when they attack your system, they want to do one of two things. They either want to bring down your capability. So for example, launching an attack against the Federal Aviation Administration's air traffic control system could bring down the air traffic control. That could leave pilots flying blind. That's a capability that we could lose at some point if the attack was successful. The other thing they do, which is equally dangerous, is they do exfiltration. They steal things from you. They can steal national secrets. They can steal design documentation for the new advanced aircraft that we're building in the Defense Department. We had a breach in OPM where they stole some very personal information from all of our federal employees who have security clearances. And that loss of intellectual property is very serious because our cutting edge technologies, our industrial base, all of the things that make our country great, when that information is stolen, that intellectual property, it degrades the capability of the companies and it makes it much more difficult to maintain that competitive edge. So this is a very serious problem today because our technology, our dependence on computers is complete. Computers are literally going to, I call it going to the edge. We're putting computers into everything. There's been a massive convergence in cyber and physical systems. You've heard of the term IoT, Internet of Things. We're pushing computers into everything that we can, and those computers are driven by software and firmware. And many times that software and firmware is just not trustworthy enough, and that gives adversaries a big advantage. We call it a very large attack surface. They can really pick the time, the place, the intensity of the attack. So it's a big concern for all of us.
Breaches are getting worse and the threats are growing every day. What is an advanced persistent threat?
Well, an advanced persistent threat, in fact, we just finished a publication and draft that deals with the advanced persistent threat. An adversary, they don't want to work hard if they don't have to, so they'll try to get into your systems with the low-hanging fruit, we call it. They'll try to compromise simple vulnerabilities. But once they're inside that system, they can take complete control of the system, either through a rootkit in an operating system. That malicious code, when it takes complete control, they control everything, they can see everything, and they have really unlimited access to everything that computer is processing, storing, or transmitting. Advanced persistent threats are a little different because they like to establish a presence, a longer term presence in your system. So many times an adversary will get the malicious code inside the system, and then you're not really even able to see it's there. Many of our breaches aren't detected for up to a year or even 2 years after the adversary's been inside. You're not always going to see capability going down. You may be more valuable to them in an upstate than a downstate because while you're up in an upstate, they're stealing stuff from you every day. And that's the real devastation because some of these advanced attacks are very hard to detect. We have really good technologies for scanning and detecting vulnerabilities, but the problem is complexity. Our systems, there's going to be 20 billion devices in the Internet of Things by 2020. We have literally billions of lines of code, billions with a B. It's a lot of code And that complexity of all the devices, the smartphones, the apps, the tablets, and all the things where computers are going into dishwashers and DVRs, it makes the attack surface huge and the complexity enormous. And that's why the adversaries right now have the advantage, because they understand that that complexity benefits them. They can pick the time, the place of the attack, and even our best scanning tools can't pick up all the vulnerabilities because the attack surface grows every day. And so when you talk about APTs, it's not about always known vulnerabilities. There was a great Defense Science Board report in 2013. Your listeners and viewers can download that. If you download Defense Science Board 2013, Military Resiliency, you'll get a PDF, and it'll tell you why our systems are so vulnerable today. We have known vulnerabilities that we understand. Every Tuesday, the big companies come out and they announce their latest patches. Those are the things we can see. But there's also something called zero-day vulnerabilities or zero-day exploits, where an adversary discovers something about your system, your network, before you do. They launch the attack. The threat exploits the vulnerability that you don't know about to cause mission or business impact. And then once you get attacked, now you know about it, it goes to the known vulnerability category. And there's also the new vulnerabilities the adversary creates through the APT that you described earlier. They create new vulnerabilities that you never had before because they now can take complete control of your system. So we are trying to develop some standards and guidelines that can help people build more secure systems from the start, reduce the attack surface, make these systems simpler, easier to understand, so we can actually deploy safeguards and countermeasures that can actually, if not stop the adversary, they can limit the damage they do once they're inside.
How do we look below the surface to detect hackers and the APTs?
It's a very difficult problem because when I talk about we ask, why is it so difficult to do cybersecurity? We've been talking about it for decades, and it's on the front pages of our newspapers. It's the hot topic every day, and yet the big breaches continue to occur. And I think this goes back to the notion of complexity and how we think about security. We tend to operate in a kinetic world. It's like on 9/11, we all have a vivid image of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. That's a kinetic attack that you can look and you can see and you internalize. Cyber is very different. Cyber attacks I equate to cancer cells. They're in the early stages of cancer. You can have it, and those cells can be doubling early, and you can be walking around feeling just fine. But the doubling rate of those cancer cells will eventually get to the point where the cancer attacks the major organs. It'll kill you. And that's what cyber is all about. When you look at your smartphone or your tablet or your laptop or any computer, you basically see a black box. Most people have no idea what goes on inside that box of complicated hardware, integrated circuits, middleware, code, applications, operating systems. All of that complexity is shielded from the user through that user interface that we all see. And so it's out of sight, out of mind. So you can be talking about cyber attacks, but under the surface, that malicious code can get in and it can start to do things that you can't see. And the danger is your system could be looking just fine, and yet you're getting really hammered through the loss of intellectual property or whatever else might be of value to the customer. We have to start thinking more in terms of cyberspace and not in terms of kinetic. Understand that we all can't be experts about what's in that black box, but we do have 4 decades now of best practices and what we call secure coding techniques, trusted systems development. We actually do know how to build more trustworthy, secure systems. It's just harder to do because consumers want more functionality. You know, what do we value? What do companies want to do? They want to build more functionality for their customers. They want more apps on the smartphone. But that goes just the opposite to the notion of what we call least functionality, least privilege. In security, we try to only deploy the minimum number of things to do your job. When you load up a smartphone with applications and all the other stuff, you end up having that huge attack surface, which is very difficult to defend.
Explain the characteristics of diversity and homogeneity in the security systems.
Well, diversity and homogeneity are 2 terms that we use. We use those terms actually in our resiliency guideline. NIST about 2 years ago, went down a new path on the security issue, where we started to develop security engineering guidelines to give information and help to vendors who are building systems to build security into systems as they're developed from the initial life cycle stage all the way to the end. And homogeneity and diversity, those are terms that we actually use in our resiliency guideline. It's kind of a double-edged sword, because if, for simplicity, if you develop a homogeneity or you have a homogeneous architecture where you have a lot of the same components, then that becomes potentially a single point of failure. An adversary discovers a vulnerability in a certain type of operating system or a certain type of database management system or a certain antivirus product. Then those particular components are going to get attacked universally across where you've deployed them. A lot of organizations will go to a more heterogeneous makeup of components, mixing up the different types of operating systems, Linux, Windows, whatever else they might use, and also different types of antivirus products. So they get a spread of capability, and also a single vulnerability can't become that single point of failure. So when you're trying to build a more resilient system, diversity and heterogeneity can be a very big advantage, because you're not giving the adversary that one kill shot that can bring you down.
How do we accelerate dissemination of the information available on cybersecurity?
Well, NIST has a great website. csrc.nist.gov is where we have all, that's our homepage. We literally have hundreds of standards and guidelines on that website and best practices. And we encourage all of our federal agencies, who that's our primary customer base, but we have, 90% of our cybersecurity problems are outside the federal government. They're in state and local governments, tribal governments, private sector. So we encourage everybody to come to our website and explore. Look at our standards and guidelines, and try to download the ones that you think are most appropriate. Most of the things we do are customizable and tailorable. So whether you're a small business, medium size, or a Fortune 500 company, you can tailor the work that we have to fit your organization. And you can always call us. We're a free resource. The taxpayers, you've all paid our salaries, and you pay us to do what we do. So we will treat our federal customers and the private sector customers the same way. You call us, send us email, and we will always try to help get you to a better place.
Ron, you're a NASCAR fan. How
Huge
is NASCAR like cybersecurity?
I've been a huge NASCAR fan for years, and it's been a passion of mine. What I like about NASCAR, I relate it to cybersecurity, because NASCAR operates in a high threat environment. They're driving these high performance race cars around a track like at Daytona or Talladega at 200 miles an hour, and they may be only a couple of inches from that cement barrier on the outside of the track. They've learned how to operate in that environment, and what they've done is they've applied great engineering concepts to making sure that those cars are as safe as they can be. They will, when Dale Earnhardt lost his life in, I think it was 2001, it was Daytona. He hit the wall 200 miles an hour and broke his neck. And NASCAR didn't just wring their hands and say, we're going to stop racing, because that threat environment, that high-end risk environment, is what puts fans in the seats. They invented something called the Hans device, head and neck safety device. Every driver wears that device around their neck, and they haven't lost one driver, and there have been horrific crashes in NASCAR since Dale Earnhardt lost his life. What I take away from that is that we can engineer our way out of this problem. We have 40 years worth of best practices in systems engineering, security engineering, mathematics, cryptography, and we can apply those the same way that our automobile industry has brought safer automobiles to our consumers through seatbelts and airbags and steel reinforced doors and those sensors now that keep you in the right lane. I think we can solve this problem. It just takes more of a will of the populace to want to get the job done. And we're going to have to make some trade-offs. Sometimes you're going to have systems that are highly secure but have less functionality. The system will be highly trusted. It can't do everything, but it can do the critical things we need to get done. So when we're building systems for power plants or financial systems or medical devices, we should be able to apply those best practices to make sure that our customers, our consumers, are getting the best devices and the best technology in as secure mode as we possibly can make, so they can do their job, be productive, and yet not have this continuous hemorrhaging of critical information to our adversaries. That's the goal that we'd like to achieve.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ron Ross, computer scientist and fellow at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. If somebody wants to connect with you, maybe they want to find out more about your work at NIST, how can they do that?
Sure, we have a lot of different ways. I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on Twitter. They can also hit our website. It's csrc.nist.gov, or you just NIST Computer Security Division, and it'll bring up that website. My email address is also a good way, ron.ross@nist.gov. Glad to connect with anybody, glad to help you out, and I appreciate you taking the time today to get our message out.
Absolutely. And if you guys want to find me and more of my interviews, you can do that right here on ZDNet or Tech Republic, or maybe go to my website. I'm at tonyahall.net. I've got links to all my social sites. I hope to hear from you. Thanks for watching.